I'm going to tell a story today, a Generation X story, I guess, if you will, from back in the 90s when I went from, it's a story about when I went from working on a factory floor, not knowing what I wanted to do in life, to within 5 years being on one of the probably the most prestigious equity trading market making desks in Canada. And just for the record of this video, this is not me bragging. This is not a story about how I accomplished something like that. It's really about the journey of creating something from nothing. I mean, I think it's disrespectful if someone were to say, when I came from nothing, and that's kind of disrespectful to my predecessors and family and ancestry and stuff like that. But I would say I came from economic no man's land for sure. I didn't come from privilege. Really didn't know what I wanted to do with my life when I was around in my early 20s. Managed to do a little bit of school, squeaked by with that. But at the time, didn't really have any direction coming out of college, and then really just needed to work, right? And it was hard finding a job. I know today young people have their challenges around how to find employment and concerns about AI, and there's always something. Every generation has their thing, and not to diminish what people have to deal with today by any means. That has its own challenges, of course, but we did back then too. I remember in the early 90s, there was a recession. Couldn't get a job for the life of me. And I remember about 30 years ago now, getting a job in a big food manufacturing plant out in the middle of nowhere for a big company. And I wasn't from the area. I had come from a city. This was out in a rural area out in the country. So tell a bit of that story is from the beginning, and I wasn't really welcome. I was an outsider. People knew it. But there was good things about working in a factory. I worked there for about 2 years, pushing around 2,000 pound stainless steel carts on wheels full of food. You work, you're physically active, so that's good for you. And it was a full-time job, gave me some employment, but I knew I was beyond just getting past my mid-20s. I was about 27. I was working there for 2 years, and I was like, I don't want to do this for the rest of my life. That's for sure. It takes its toll on your body and all that. So I found something else to do that wouldn't be as hard on me. Got this insurance company job briefly, and then eventually applied for a job as a teller in a bank branch. And I had, when I was working in the factory, bought my first house, modest, bungalow house in a small town. And I went and I got this teller job. Well, I had this house before I got that job, and this was not a job that I could hang on to the house for very long. I wasn't making very much money. I think I was there for about 2 weeks, and there was the internal job boards, and there was I saw this one role for working for what's called a discount brokerage at the time. I guess if, in the United States, it'd be something similar to, I don't know, TD Ameritrade and stuff like that, as a licensed investment representative. And I went to my new boss that I only had for about a week and a half, 2 weeks, and I said, can I apply for this? He said, Jeff, you just got here, relax. But she eventually came around and didn't fire me and said, yeah, okay, go ahead. I did. And in early 1998, I got an interview. And I didn't get the job at the time, but it lit a fire under me. And that's what happens, like out of necessity. You know, like something happens, you develop an interest. And that's what I did. Developed an interest in the markets, started reading a lot of books about legendary equity traders and hedge fund managers. And, you know, having come from, like I said, economic no man's land, that was all new to me and just really was very motivating. And so one thing led to another, and I went through training programs and such in the bank, and got other kind of jobs, moved up a little bit. And one day in the year 2000, very early in the spring of the year 2000, I was sitting in my small office in a bank branch out in the middle of nowhere, bored out of my mind. Didn't really like what I was doing, but you know, you got to do what you got to do. It's either working in a factory or this kind of job. I was still relatively young, not that young, but relatively young, and sitting there, and had, you know, been with the bank a couple of years, and I get this phone call. Now, mind you, just to set the stage for this next move, my boss was away and her boss was away. And generally how it goes is, you know, you need their permission to make a decision, and it's up to them whether they're going to give you the stamp of approval as to whether you can make a move or not to another role. And I'd only been there for about 6 months in this location. So it was the lady who interviewed me 2 years before. And she said, Jeff, I've been looking for you. We're hiring, and would you be interested in coming to work with us? I was stunned. And at the time, this was before the sort of 2000, 2001 .com sort of market meltdown, if you will. So at the time, back in 98, they could be really selective, and I thought I was a pretty good candidate, but so did a lot of other people, I'm sure, at the time. But by the year 2000, basically taking any warm body with a license to be able to do the job, and I fit that bill because I had done all these courses in preparation. At the time, it was like the Canadian Securities course and a multitude of other ones to allow me to be licensed to trade different kind of things. In any case, I said to her name is Erica, lovely lady, and I said, yeah, absolutely, I want to come and do that. And she said, well, I'm going to need your answer and, you know, approvals and things like that. And I said, well, I really want to make this happen, so please take this as a yes from me anyway, and let's do whatever we got to do. And I was motivated, you know, I was very motivated. So in any case, she took that as a yes. I took it as a yes. Pardon the noise here. And next thing you know, my manager came back, her manager came back, and the shit hit the fan. Because here's me, junior employee, given the go-ahead for a job that needed their approval. And their first response when they found this out was, yeah, I don't think so, absolutely not. And this was my ticket, as far as I was concerned, to be more in tune with the kind of work that I wanted to do at the time. And I told them in no uncertain terms that really appreciate the opportunity here. But I looked into it and I realized that they wanted people so badly that if you quit your job, very risky, wouldn't recommend this move, but if at the time you quit your job, they could hire you within 45 days. And I knew I really didn't want to do what I was doing at the time. So that's what I did. I put my notice in, living out in the middle of nowhere. Didn't have any children at the time, had a wife, and took a risk. And that was a really risky move. That was a real risky move, but it did pay off. I did get hauled into the regional vice president's office, who told me I should be more considerate of my family. I was very polite to him. He was a very nice man, but I thought, who the fuck are you to tell me to be considerate of my family, really? And that was probably just young blood flowing through my veins. In any case, they let me go, thankfully. And I would, if I could go back and thank them for doing that, I definitely would, because I'd have more gratitude. Sometimes you have to make those decisions, and that's what I certainly did on my own. And luckily, it did pay off, and I ended up going to this discount brokerage. So this was a couple of years. This was about 2.5 years removed from working on the factory floor that I referenced earlier, after coming from nothing. I wasn't making much money, but it was something. And I got to this discount brokerage, had the worst seat in the house, sat there doing absolutely nothing for about 3 weeks till I finally, no computer at the time, just sitting there waiting. Nobody was talking to me. Nobody would acknowledge me. My new manager clearly didn't like me. And they had so many people they didn't know what to do with, because the market was just, there was a saying, like, everybody and their grandmother wanted to open up one of these accounts and be trading. So I was sitting there waiting, and very calmly I went to one of the other senior managers and I said, hey, like, I'd really like to be able to do something, and is there anything like I could do? And I guess they were waiting for my licensing to come in. And that's all I said was, hey, like, is there something I could maybe do? Or do you know when my licensing is going to come in? And yeah, I'm just excited to get started, just trying to be, positive and enthusiastic. Well, I guess the manager I had, this guy, his name was Lou, he probably just didn't like the look of me or something like that. And he caught wind that I was asking about when I was going to start and do some work. And he came over and he told me to, like, stay in my lane, keep my mouth shut, sit there, wait till time was ready, and he'd come and get me and stop causing trouble, basically. Okay, fast forward 6 months, out of 500 people that they had doing this kind of job, I was in the top 3 of performance every single month, because it was very competitive. It was very meritocratic, unlike these days. And things went really well. And then the market took a massive crash after about a year. And luckily, due to performance, I was able to go through about 4 rounds of layoffs, cutbacks, and was one of the last people kind of standing there, if you will. And I went to the vice president at the end of one of my days, and I asked him if there was any other opportunities that they might have in mind. And he said, yes, there actually was one. And this job was like an intermediary between basically helping to solve problems and resolve issues quickly between the bank's retail trading desk and this discount brokerage I was working for. And it was kind of like we had a really small head office. There was less than 10 people. So he said, do you want to do that? I said, absolutely, yes. And that's what happened. And that job, one thing led to another. I was able to build some relationships between, me doing that role and that retail trading desk at the bank. And one thing led to another, and they hired me. And I was there, and after about a year with trying to be in the right place at the right time, saying the right things to the right people, navigating politics. Wasn't very good at playing the so-called game, but there I was, and eventually became became a market maker and what was called a pro, or in the States is proprietary equity trader, making markets on about a dozen stocks on a large exchange. Now, why do I tell this story? Well, a couple of reasons. One, just to kind of document one part of my life, maybe for my kids, I don't know, but also just to show that it's possible to really create something from nothing. And a lot of times that just happens out of necessity. You know, if that means you got to get out there and work 2 or 3 jobs to make ends meet, something's gonna click in your mind, in your heart, in your soul, something you become interested in. Because I know what it's like to be young and not really have any defined path or interest. And once you get that, if it just lights a bit of a fire in you, it's just to go after it, man. Just go after it with everything you've got, and don't take no for an answer. Be thoughtful about, that's what I would tell my younger self, be thoughtful and mindful of your family, possibly a spouse, a significant other, or if you're taking care of like older parents or something, you have responsibilities, you don't want to be reckless. And that's a whole other thing. And I've been guilty of this myself. You could argue that by quitting a job out in the middle of nowhere in the year 2000 was reckless. It probably was. And I would have maybe handled things a little differently if I was a bit older, but I wasn't. And here we are today. I'll put a link in this video of another video I did talking about how I ended up leaving and walking away and quitting that very privileged equity trading role that I had for a number of reasons. And yeah, what else did I learn about that journey? This isn't a video about equity trading. It's about finding your path. It was an interesting journey, to say the least. Feels like a million years ago. I was against all odds. I wouldn't be able to repeat that feat if I tried. Even if I was to go back and at that time, if I could travel in time and try to do it again, I don't know whether it would have happened. And also I've had to learn a lot about just life, gratitude, and what really matters in life. Really finding your people, your roots, your family, maintaining what's important and growing what's important, growing as a person, learning some humility, being able to be resilient in the face of disappointment. Those are all things like I've had to learn, because I wasn't always that way. Like for a while there, probably 5 years, I identified with that equity trading role, like I had accomplished something that was against all odds, but you aren't what you do. And I certainly learned that. And the novelty eventually wore off. I did that for a period of time, and the novelty really wore off, because you get tired of market crashes, 6 to 8 months of not making any money because there isn't really any opportunity. Everything just goes sideways, and there's nothing to try to take advantage of. So that's the story of my story anyway, of how I went from working on a factory floor and within 5 years became a market maker and a professional equity trader. But yeah, thanks for listening, and I'll link to my other video where I eventually quit that job. Crazy enough.